Welcome to Getting It Right by the New Zealand Society of Genealogists. I'm your presenter, Sarah Hewitt. For the notes that accompany this presentation and the other Getting It Right learning resources, please see our website www.genealogy.org.nz. This presentation is an overview of sources that you might find here in New Zealand. I'm going to say quite a number of times in the presentation, refer to the notes. So please take the time to find the notes that accompany this video on the NZSG website. It has links to help you find the sources that I'll refer to in the presentation. So let's get started on what are called vital records: births, marriages and deaths. I'm also expanding them to include baptisms, bans and licenses, divorce records, burials and inquests. So here in New Zealand, births, marriages and deaths are held by the Department of Internal Affairs. On their website, they're split into two different categories. Non-historical, these are the more modern records. There is no search facility available, and to order them through the website, you need a RealMe login. The historical records are searchable, and this can be very useful, but there's what is called an embargo on them. So they only include births that are more than 100 years old from today, marriages that are more than 80 years old, and deaths, which gets a little bit complicated, that occurred either 50 years ago, or the person would now be older than 80. You can search these records, and once you've found a result that you want, order them online and get the DIA to email a printout to you. Now the key word here is printout. This is actually a certificate. How do I know? Because it's typed. What we're looking for is a printout, and it will look like this. This is my grand's birth record, and you can see it's handwritten, and that's what you want, because the typed version allows other people to make transcription errors, and you don't want that. We want to see the original. There are church records here in New Zealand, but they're still held by the churches that produced them. So you'll need to know which church your family members were part of and approach that church to find out which records it has. Cemeteries here in New Zealand are all run by the local councils. They're municipal, and many of the councils have online databases detailing who's buried where. The NZSG also has a burial index which is available to members. Archives New Zealand hold all of New Zealand's government records. Interesting ones include intentions to marry, which are kind of like a marriage license. They also hold divorce records. Now some of these are indexed, but many of them are not. If you're having trouble finding a divorce record, talk to the staff in your local archives office. Do note that there is a 100-year embargo on divorce records, but they can be obtained by getting permission through the courts. They also have inquest records. The first you may hear of an untimely demise of a family member is in the newspapers, and that's also a good place to look for information about these sorts of passings. Censuses. They're a great source of information, and unfortunately here in New Zealand they have all been destroyed up until the 1966 one, so they're not available. But there are a number of what are called substitutes. They're not as good as censuses because they won't include all the members of the household. But you can find post office directories that will tell you where your family lived and what they did. And electoral rolls. Now we're very lucky here in New Zealand that women got the suffrage in 1893. That means that we're decades ahead of other countries in having women on the electoral roll. And another interesting resource we have here in New Zealand is the actual women's suffrage petition itself. It's available online, and if you're in Wellington you can go and look at the real thing in the He Tohu exhibition. Have a look and see if one of the 25,000 signatures on the petition is a member of your family. There are big holes geographically, so there might not be, but do go and have a look. You never know what you might find. Now of course everybody passes away. Here in New Zealand you're more likely to find a will and probate than many other countries because people owned land. It's one of the reasons they immigrated in the first place. These wills are held by Archives New Zealand, but they've undergone a digitisation project with familysearch.org, so look on their website to find what you're looking for. There are tips in the notes about how to search for them. Newspapers are a great source of information that you won't find in official records. And we're very lucky here in New Zealand that we have the National Library and their Papers Past website. It includes papers from around the country and up into the Pacific Islands. The newspapers contained on Papers Past are always expanding, so do make sure you check back to see what might be new there. We have a long military history here in New Zealand, and going backwards in time, World War II and more recent records are still held by the New Zealand Defence Force, and you'll need to contact them directly. The World War I records for the New Zealand Expeditionary Force are held by Archives New Zealand, and they underwent a humongous digitisation project to get them available on their website Archway. So go and have a look there. These records will only be personnel records. To find out more about what your family members were doing in the military, you need to have a look at the regimental histories. These are on Victoria University's NZETC site. There are also other military records related to New Zealand, such as militias, which can be found also at Archives. British records, you need to go back to Britain. I've added some links in on the notes, so have a look. Now, we'd all like to find out how our family got to New Zealand, and there are many passenger lists available. All the passenger lists held by Archives New Zealand have been digitised in conjunction with FamilySearch.org. There are also numerous other websites out there which contain transcripts of passenger lists. It is important to remember that many people came to New Zealand via Australia. They may have only stopped there long enough to change ship, but they might have been there for a couple of years or a couple of generations before heading on to New Zealand. Generally speaking, there aren't many passenger lists between Australia and New Zealand. It's been likened to catching the bus. The records were just not kept. So you might find records that get your family to Australia. So don't forget to have a look in Australia if you're not finding records of them here in New Zealand. Another source of passenger information can be in the newspaper. Now, of course, the richer your family and the better the accommodation they had on the ship, the more likely they are to be in the newspaper. If you have a look at the very bottom of this newspaper clipping, it says 37 for Otago. Now, if your family were one of those 37, obviously they're not being documented in this newspaper article. But the earlier ships into New Zealand will have full listings of everybody who arrived. If you have Māori Whakapapa, I'd suggest joining the NZSG's Māori Interest Group. Their members cover a wide range of iwi, and they know where to find the records that might be relevant to your iwi. And don't forget that there's a huge number of local museums, libraries and archives out there, all of which will have records for their local area or their specialist subject. Get in touch with them or go and visit. You never know what you'll find until you ask. Thanks for joining us. This is the last presentation in our Starting Your Genealogical Journey series. Have a look at our website for other presentations. Bye for now. For further information, see our website www.genealogy.org.nz, and we'd like to thank the Wellington Masonic Club for their support in making these presentations. See you next time.